Well, hello, my friends. Welcome to me, your host, Christian Watson. My friends, the Senate just passed what I think is probably one of the worst pieces of legislation passed recently on the federal level, and that is a $40 billion plus aid bill to the nation of Ukraine to continue to fuel the essentially the undeclared war the United States is now in that part of the world, continue to fuel the aggression between Ukraine and Russia. Indeed, the aid bill will now bring the total U.S. aid given to Ukraine since the beginning of the world to over $50 billion. And, just to break down, my friends, I'm not really interested in the particulars of the aid itself, but just to break down, from 2014, when Russia first went into Crimea, annexed it with an illegitimate election, and then said, hey, this is our land now. From 2014 to April 25th, 2022, the United States, according to the Congressional Research Service, gave Ukraine for $6.4 billion. Since the war has started, though, that number has been inflated. The war started in February, and it's very, very difficult to calculate the sheer amount we've given to Ukraine since that number has been upped time and time again. A few months ago, we gave them $14.6 billion, and the aid bills break down in multiple ways. Weapons transfers, they break down in terms of replenishing the military stock, giving money to the European Central Command, all kind of stuff. But ultimately, my friends, and what's really concerning is that this bill in the Senate was only objected to by a handful of senators. Most people on both sides of the aisle voted for this bill. And this is why I've always said, my friends, the term bipartisan should scare you, because all bipartisan means is that both parties consented to an action that most likely violates your liberty or most likely has no moral justification or merit to it. But the problem is, many in the media use the term bipartisan as a sort of elixir to confer moral correctness upon a legislative action without actually asking if the action in itself was just. Okay, this is something I bring up on this channel multiple times. It's called proximity ethics. If an action is bipartisan, its proximity to bipartisanship is allegedly a stand-in for the action's justification, rather than actually looking at the action and saying, this is good, this is good, this is good, this is bad. That's the problem. We have to stop being people of proximity, which is learned behavior, by the way. Human beings did not survive off proximity, and we have to be creatures of reason, of rationalism. And any man of reason, I dare say, will understand what I'm about to say right now and will appreciate it. My friends, foreign aid has a very long and storied history. And I'm not particularly interested in this one instance of the United States giving over $50 billion in general of foreign aid to Ukraine. I'm more so interested in what that conveys. My friends, you should always look for the principle that underlies certain policy actions. In isolation, the United States giving military aid to one country in one point in history is not consequential. But when you connect it to the other points in history we've done it, when you connect it more generally to that broader principle, it becomes more consequential and more important. And of course, the United States giving money to Ukraine does indeed convey a principle which has been happening for the past few decades now, ever since contemporary foreign military resistance has been conceived of, and that is the principle of the United States and other countries using money as a geopolitical tool, as a geopolitical weapon to push their political self-interest and not actually consider the fundamental rights and liberties of those they're supposed to serve. That was a mouthful, so let me explain here. My friends, as I mentioned, the history of foreign aid is long and storied. Now, if you go off and you look up the history of foreign aid, you're going to get many entries, including some scholarly entries, that will date the beginning of foreign aid back to 1940s, the post-World War II era where the Marshall Plan happened, then during the Cold War era where the United States funded Greece and Turkey to beat back communism. But I would say the history of foreign aid goes back way before that, probably to the extent where human civilization has existed. The French gave Americans foreign aid during the war effort, all that good stuff. But for our purposes here, we'll consider the nature of contemporary foreign aid, since it's closer to my contention. So it is right that foreign aid really began during, at least with the United States, during the Marshall Plan, when the United States essentially pumped a lot of money into Europe after the war, because a lot of European nations were absolutely devastated by the war. And so the United States acted as the agent to prop them up, so to speak. And with that, obviously, came geopolitical ties. With that came the establishment of the UN, the International World Bank, International Monetary Fund, all these different agencies, NATO, a lot of agencies sprung out of this sort of Russia foreign aid. Then the Cold War comes in and the U.S. begins funding, giving military assistance to many countries to beat back the Soviet Union. The USSR does the same exact thing. And then foreign aid morphs simply from what Robert McNamara said it should be, a sort of supplying the basic needs of people around the world, to being a more violent geopolitical force, or going to more violent aims. But the principle is all the same. It's a political agent supplying other political agents with money in return for something. Foreign aid is not simply a charity operation. Foreign aid is primarily a political operation, and all political operations are tit for tat. They are transactional in nature. Let's go back over to Ukraine. The United States has had a strategic security initiative partnership with Ukraine since 2014. And on August 25th, 2021, there was actually an initiative signed between the United States DoD and Ukraine, in which they lay out several principles of this relationship. Now, here's the thing, though. The principles of the relationship between the United States and Ukraine do not at all justify a moral obligation for the United States to do what it is doing. Rather, they simply justify certain geopolitical aims that previous presidential administrations thought, this one thought are appropriate. And that's where this should begin, and that's where this should end. This is where our inquiry should end. My friends, anytime you see a political action happen and it does not have the backing of first principles, you should be skeptical. Many people who are saying we should give money to Ukraine are doing so on the grounds of emotional platitudes and not on the grounds of establishing and then tracing through history a moral obligation that we have to serve another nation's people while at the same time neglecting our own. But also, my friends, foreign military aid is not simply bad because it lacks moral obligation. Foreign military aid is particularly bad because it propagates an activity that is destructive to human creative potential, and that activity is war. I want you, my friends, to think of human activity like a river. Human activity is built upon our energy, right? And we don't have unlimited energy. As human beings, we have very controlled and finite energy, which is why the term you have to maximize your time, make every day count, that's so important, because you cannot do everything everywhere. And rivers flow on the basis of what I call the principle of movement, and that principle is dependent on energy. A river flows downwards because it has certain levels of energy, and at certain stages in the river's progression, it has different levels of energy. So when a river is a creek, it's more easily for you to control that creek, or when it begins as a creek rather, it's more easily to control that creek. But when the creek becomes a waterfall, which many creeks do, there's a cascade of energy that just bursts out, erodes a lot of things, and then go down to a tributary, and the energy is more controlled. Now, my friends, the point is this: a river has a defined path, but that defined path can take many different turns, and no one river is the same, which is why I think that it's a very good analogy for human beings. All human beings have a defined path throughout life. We will die one day, but what we do while we're on that path is going to be up to us. We are invested with the power of free will. Now, rivers have these odd formations that are called oxbow lakes. And what an oxbow lake is, an oxbow lake happens when a river is trying to move and around something, and the landmass gets really tight, and the river begins to erode the area around that landmass and deposit it, and eventually it will break off, and it'll form a little body of water which has no connection to the river's main path. So an oxbow lake is essentially a lake that is on the side of a river's path, but no water flows in or out of it. It's dead. it can produce nothing. Oxbow lakes tend to become swamps or they become bogs, and bogs are simply, areas with a lot of vegetation that is dying and decaying. And also, not only that, but many of them tend to dry up and evaporate. Now, my friend, you are the human being, you are the dynamic human being that is flowing along the river, going towards the ocean like all rivers do. But what war does, war takes human potential and energy and squeezes the life out of it because war creates nothing. War does nothing but create things in its image. The only things that are created in war are machines that can further propagate war. But war destroys human capital, war destroys economies, war destroys human creative potential that go beyond destruction, because when you destroy things and your sole focus is destroying things, you cannot therefore create things. And therefore, war is like taking a river and squeezing all life out of it and then siphoning us all into tiny little oxbow lakes where we can create nothing except what is already contained within those lakes. Ergo, war. War creates nothing and only thrives off of its own energy. War thrives off of its own destructive capability. And that's the problem. When you have human beings who are meant to be creating stuff, meant to be being ingenuitive, meant to be doing things, applying their minds to this dynamic world, when you fixate on one particular activity which does nothing but cause loss and destruction and decay, then you are dampening human potential. And foreign aid is an instrument to continue that kind of activity. And that is the primary reason why foreign aid is bad when it leads to military aid. Now, there is humanitarian aid, which in some cases I think is fine. No, I have no problem with humanitarian aid, because humanitarian aid, using the same analogy, keeps the river's waters flowing in the correct direction and simply takes the rocks or the grains that the river has accumulated over time and puts them off to the side. That's the healing action. So humanitarian aid can be quite fine, although I think that it's better for private organizations to do humanitarian aid because they tend to, unfortunately, they don't necessarily have political aims. But governments always are self-interested and have political aims, and one thing will most certainly lead to another. As Lloyd Austin and Antony Blinken said when they went over to Ukraine, this is not simply about defending Ukraine anymore. This is about, as Austin and Blinken said, weakening Russia. These are their words, weakening Russia so it cannot do something again like invade Ukraine. And as the British Home Secretary that said in her conference with Blinken, it is time for the West rather to reapproach Russia like it did before the Cold War. I'm paraphrasing, that's essentially what she said. The point is, my friends, we have a bunch of people, a bunch of river keepers who don't want to allow the river to simply flow without resistance, but want to destroy the river's potential and siphon us off into their own little oxbow lakes and then say we're doing something good and then say we're doing something benevolent. We have people, leaders in the West, who want to propagate war indirectly or directly. It does not matter. It has the same disastrous effect. It has the same disastrous principle. And of course, this foreign aid is also fueling the efforts which are unjustly punishing Russian citizens and American citizens. American citizens are being punished with high gas prices. They're being punished with bad supply chain crisis because almost all Western nations have sanctioned Russia to no end. Innocent Russians who have nothing to do with the war whatsoever, like that pianist in Canada or those Russian soccer teams and sports teams in Europe, are also being punished with cancellation of their tournaments or the revocation of their ability to play and do their genius because of what Vladimir Putin is doing and because people are assigning the idea of collective guilt to them. My friends, in a world full of beautiful dynamic rivers, we're being forced to become oxbow lakes. And the point is, if the entire river becomes an area in which no water flows in or out, the river dies. You cannot put human potential into a box. You cannot mistreat human potential or things go bad. My friends, foreign aid in this context is not simply bad because America is fighting a war as no one is fighting. It's bad because what America and the West are funding are fundamental assaults on our ability to do human action and conduct it in the right way. My friends, this is not a political message per se. This is an existential message, a philosophic message. Do you consider all these impacts in the underlying principle? Or will you simply look at this from a political level and bury your head in the sand and say, no, we must beat back Russia. We must save the Ukrainians. Human beings do not thrive in periods of destruction. And when you have political leaders trying to take you down those paths, you should always be skeptical and you should always ask why. And asking why will require a knowledge and understanding of who you are as a human being. Think on it. My friends, love you guys so much. If you love me, please support me at patreon.com/PhilCWatson, or please go to PayPal, officialcwatson@gmail.com, or please go to my locals, which is going to be christianwatson@logos.com, or please go to my Discord, which is in the comment section down below. My friends, please like this video, please subscribe to this channel, please comment on this video, and please share this video. This message is dynamite. My friends, I love you guys so much, and please stay offensive. Bye, guys.